before you begin, you might notice that this watercolor is a lot darker than the one I did yesterday. And that's because I was able to do it over again. And so this is why we practice, because sometimes the first time we do something is not the best. I realized that I was missing all of these darker values. And so I ended up making it over again. If you have the opportunity and an extra sheet of paper and you want to do it again, please do it, because that's what's gonna make your skills get a lot better. Today though, we're gonna be putting our stars over top of our sky. In your watercolor packet, you should have this opaque white, and we're gonna take a little bit of that and put it on our watercolor palette. To open that up, if you have a silver cap on, you'll just use the sharp point of this and kind of poke a hole in it to open that up. But you only need like a little dab of white paint and just put it right on the lid of your watercolor. Get your number 10 rectangular synthetic brush, and you're just going to very subtly, it's a lot of water, but thin out that white paint so it looks like that watercolor consistency. Whenever you splatter, you want to make sure that you protect your canvas or the surrounding area from getting white paint on it. So I'm going to take a white piece of paper and I'm going to place it over top of the other painting. To do splatter paint, you're going to point the corner of the brush down into the painting, and then you're pulling back really fast on the bristles with your finger. But then flick it directly on top of your picture. And that's how you're going to get the stars over top of your sky. So it's just minorly thinned out. Don't thin it out as much as I did in the beginning. I had to go back and add in more white paint. You can add in as many stars as you want. And there we have it, a starry background. Clean off your palette lid by taking some wet paper towels and wiping off that extra white paint. And then once again, take your brush, clean it off in warm water, and then drag it across the paper towel, and then lay it flat to dry. Next, we're going to draw in our cactuses on our landscape on the right. Whenever you draw in your objects, we always want to break it down into simple shapes. Now for your actual landscape painting, you're already going to have everything drawn in there. For time's sake, we're just, modifying it by drawing it after it's painted in. The reason why you don't really want to do it this specific process is because if you would mess up, you're going to erase away the pigment in the sky. So if these do not turn out perfect, not a big deal. We're just trying to get the illusion of cactus on here. These are practice paintings. So if they don't turn out to be perfect works of art, that is okay. So for this cactus, notice how far up it goes. So it goes about, an inch of the way down from the top of your composition. I'm using my 2H pencil. So I'm almost creating like one of those blind contour line drawings that we did a while ago whenever we were doing the drawing unit. This is just a nice rounded cylinder that gets slightly wider on the bottom. Here we have a little left arm that comes up. And remember, as we draw what we see, not what we think we see. So always analyze the photo and glance back at your drawing to make sure that whatever you are drawing matches the photograph. There's a little bit of a smidgen of a cactus arm coming out this way that we'll put in. And look at the negative space between here. This is very close. It's also starting up a little bit past where that little nibbin went. So that's where I'm going to start my line. Ends at about this height here. And I'll bring it back down this way. I need to add in the other one that's coming in. and I run. But to finish, we're just gonna do 2 more cactuses. Even though on the reference photo it shows a lot more, the nice thing is we can simplify things because we are our own artist. So we are gonna do the cactus, the larger one on the right-hand side. So once again, look at the contour of that cactus. Notice where it's ending in relation to the larger cactus that we drew on the left. This one also gets wider at the base. And then this third cactus is further back into the distance, so we're gonna make that smaller. So that should start about here. To paint in this cactus, you're going to use your number 3 Royal and Langnickel brush. It's this soft synthetic brush that comes to a point. To loosen up the bristles, wet it in the water, and then we're just going to dip that directly into the black watercolor. We don't need to take any and put it on our lid because we want this nice and super concentrated. And then just begin painting in the black within the contour line drawing of your cactus. If the paint starts to skip across the surface, then re-wet the black to get it to have a little bit more water in there so it flows a little bit easier across your painting. Whenever you start doing your smaller cactuses, to get this to be a nice fine point, as you pull the paint, swirl the brush as you pull it from that little circle, and then that will make it a nice fine point. So swirling that brush will put all the bristles back to the fine point, and that will allow you to make really nice fine lines. And just press lightly as you're putting in these lighter lines so you don't make them too thick.
Once the cactuses are painted in, you can just paint the very bottom portion of this fully black.
For the painting on the left, instead of doing the person with the rocks, we're going to channel Bob Ross and make some happy trees like what we're seeing here in this galaxy painting that I've made. For this next step, we're going to begin using our number 6 small rectangular Royal Langnickel brush. We're going to get it just slightly damp and then work it into the black watercolor. You only want a little bit of the watercolor on the brush for this. We're going to be using the side of our brush like this and making all of the individual trees that we're seeing. So in the middle of the composition, go over a little bit to the right, and I want you to draw a small to medium sized line, and that's going to be our first tree. I'm going to draw another line very close to it, a little bit off to the right. It's a little bit shorter in height. A third one on the left hand side. A smaller one below that. And we'll do a taller tree over here. And then just get a little bit more water so that paint will flow. And then a taller medium tree closer to the edge but not quite touching it. Let's give some space between the smaller tree and this medium tree that we're going to draw on the left. one just a little bit taller. And we'll do 3 other larger trees on the left-hand side. Try to have the tops of your trees vary throughout the composition. I'm trying to make sure that no top of a tree is the same height as another line. So notice that all of my line heights vary. And if I would draw a line over, make that one a little bit taller, it doesn't match up with any other line that I put in. This last tree, we're gonna have it be fairly big. It's gonna be the tallest tree that we'll put in. We'll put it right there. Okay, when you're done, clean off the brush, remove any extra moisture. And we're gonna make some happy trees. We're gonna channel Bob Ross. Here we go. Okay, so to make happy trees, this is what you do. You start with the corner of your brush. Think about wanting to make a triangle, and I am pouncing my brush on the surface, making these little tiny dots for like the top of a pine tree. And as I paint further down, notice I'm changing the angle of my brush to where it's becoming horizontal when it starts meeting these wider branches. And I'm just pouncing back and forth to create the shape of that tree. You're going to repeat that process for every single tree that you have. So once again, I'm pouncing, and as I come further down, I'm making my brush horizontal. Try not to have too much watercolor on your brush. We don't want to create little puddles of trees. We want to have the control. And it's just a tapping motion. And don't make it a solid triangle. You want to have some of that sky showing through, because pine trees aren't fully solid. They let the light show through the branches. So you have to have that space in between your branches for it to look realistic. You also want the edges to vary. You know, some branches can come out further than others. Just make sure that you're leaving some negative space in there to help it make it look more realistic. And the base of these bigger trees should get wider than the trees that we've previously done, because it's bigger, so it should be wider on the bottom. So as we draw the bigger trees, the scale and wide points of our mark should get wider as we paint. So I'm coming back to this little tiny one, so I don't want to make my marks as wide. I'll pounce with the corner of my brush a little bit further down than I would before I start going into using the side of my brush. And take your time making these happy little trees. We want the base of the trees to get darker and more congested near the bottom, because we're gonna paint in the bottom part of this scene completely black. So it's just like the tops of the trees that we're seeing. Try to angle your brush too. We don't want these branches to look too straight across. They were looking a little too straight here, so I'm going to come up and give it some angles. Now that we've gotten to the bottom, we can just paint that bottom in black. I like to kind of go in with some more pouncing marks near the very base of my trees as it blends into the black, just so I can get that texture in there. So it kind of like blends into the trees really easily. And then I'll go in, once that's done, with black on wet paper. And there you have it. Two beautiful looking landscapes, two ways that you can approach this project. So whenever we begin referencing photos for this, you can either choose to do a smooth gradated sky with multiple colors as a sunset for your painting, or you can do a constellation scene like what we did here. Whichever one you enjoyed more or maybe had more success in, maybe that would be the one that you would choose for the project.